reels of peculiar aural impressions. It has only been 100 years since sound has been introduced to film. Sound in horror films can be traced back to the early 1920s. Many silent films were accompanied by a live orchestra that played ominous music as the film was rolling. Nosferatu was the first horror film to have a soundtrack in 1922. The original score was composed by Hans Erdmann and performed by an orchestra. 6 years later, in 1928, Warner Brothers released their second all-talkie picture, their first film with synchronized sound. Roy Del Ruth's The Terror was an American pre-code horror film. The sound effects were recorded on a separate Vitaphone disc. The original film is basically lost unless you can find a nitrate print or you can locate a copy of the remake that was released in 1938. What is pre-code, you ask? Pre-code Hollywood was a short era in American film industry in the middle of the global adoption of sound and film in 1929. Between the 1920s and 30s, movie content was restricted by local laws, negotiations between the Studio Relations Committee, major studios, and popular opinion. Instead of having a strict adherence, Hays Code is what escalated film censorship for pictures that were deemed immoral and promoted bad behavior from 1934 to 1968. Controversy ensued when sound was introduced to horror films. Sound provided atmospheric music, sound effects, unearthly voiced lurid dialogue, and blood-curdling screams. The addition of sound intensified its effects on audiences. The Hays Code did not specify the limitations of gruesomeness, and directors used this to their advantage. In 1933, RKO Radio Pictures released one of the greatest horror films, King Kong! King Kong was subjected to the censorship of the pre-code. Because of this, 6 scenes were self-censored prior to the release. Unlike Nosferatu and The Terror, King Kong is entirely filled with music. King Kong had the first full feature-length musical score written for an American talkie film. The score was composed by Max Steiner with the accompaniment of a 46-piece orchestra. All the scenes with dialogue are treated with quiet, pensive string and woodwinds with intervals of timpani and brass. This is heard in Steiner's use of leitmotifs. A leitmotif is a music or literary composition associated with a particular person, idea, or situation. If you've ever seen the original James Bond, the main theme song has leitmotifs. Fear is a negative emotion that comes about when people are under siege or threat. The enjoyment some people get from fear is likely not from fear itself, but from the physical and emotional release that follows scary situations. Sound in horror movies can conjure physiological responses. Sound designers use 4 major classifications when building their sound design: dissonance, uncertainty, fear, and the dynamics of volume, tempo, and pitch. Cheerful music is often used in horror films to juxtapose what is happening visually. In Mary Herron's American Psycho, soundtrack dissonance is used to have an effect where the music is out of place to create a strong emotional response. In the infamous scene where the main character invites a coworker over for drinks, he performs a boisterous monologue about Huey Lewis and the news and their commercial success. The main character proceeds to play the 80s pop sensation Hip to Be Square and dances around while he commits an axe murder. The use of cheerful music in a frightful setting attempts to provide a sardonic counter to the surrealism of the horror that precedes it. What if sound was the enemy? In John Krasinski's A Quiet Place, the small sounds are more terrifying than the monsters. The sound designers of A Quiet Place, Eric Adal and Ethan Van der Ryan, played with the use of negative space to create uncertainty by using whispers and silence. The film is set in a post-apocalyptic world where Earth has been taken over by alien monsters that are attracted to sound. Any sound will result in death. The sound design evokes a sonic perspective by allowing the audience to hear through the ears of the deaf daughter. The first scene starts with amplified decibels to evoke a relatable and comfortable setting for the audience. This is known as a psychoacoustic effect. The perception of sound, the sensations produced by sounds, frequencies, speech, and music. When the sonic perspective comes into play, everyone watching becomes tense and starts anticipating what will happen next because all that is heard is silence. The most common sounds heard in horror films are described as having a scream-like quality that can signify danger. Scream-like is typically categorized as pianto, the motif of a descending minor second. It represents laments, and when played by instruments or by the use of vocals, the scream-like music sounds similar to human crying or weeping, triggering an emotional response. In Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, the screeching sound during the shower scene, hearing that is meant to provoke a fear response. Fear is a powerful emotion. It alters what we hear and see. It makes us feel unpleasant because it tries to motivate us towards survival. This is a psychological experience that can be automatic and uncontrollable. We become startled even when we know that we are not in any danger. Have you experienced headaches, disorientation, fatigue, or nausea while watching a movie? You may have been a victim of low-status sound, or more commonly known as infrasound. Infrasound is described as sound waves with a frequency below 20 Hz. Infrasound exists in nature and is created by wind, earthquakes, avalanches, and is used by elephants to communicate over long distances. In the film Irreversible, director Gaspar Noé admitted that he intentionally used sound registered at 27 Hz during the first 30 minutes of the film. When audiences viewed the film, they heard deep rumblings and otherworldly grinding sounds increase, causing them to feel dread and anxiety before the disturbing imagery that appeared on the screen. Infrasound creates an environment where you sense a looming threat, but you have no idea where it's coming from. Sound design has developed an extensive amount within the past 100 years. I hope you all enjoyed the reels of peculiar aural impressions. Thank you for your time.